Brooke ran her fingers along the window frame, feeling the cold, polished wood against her skin. The late afternoon sun filtered through the curtains, casting amber tones across the floor. The old house, full of history, seemed to breathe with her, as if they had both been shaped by time. Every wall, every restored tile, bore the mark of her hands and her sacrifices. It was more than a home. It was a portrait of a lifetime of effort. She had dreamed of that moment for years, ever since the days she shared a small rented room and sketched designs on the kitchen table. Now, everything was hers. The high ceilings, the floors that creaked with a comforting sound, the scent of wood mixed with fresh paint. Brooke felt proud, but also a strange melancholy. Perhaps because, even surrounded by beauty, a sense of loneliness still followed her. The house was perfect, but the silence was sometimes too heavy to bear. That night, she walked slowly through the hallways, checking every detail before bed. She touched the door frames, checked the locks, and glanced at her phone screen where the security cameras showed still, peaceful images. The technology gave her a false sense of control, and she liked it. It was the kind of vigilance that replaced having someone else there. Brooke smiled ironically at the thought that the house saw more of her than any person ever did. As she lay down, she thought of Mark, the brother she hadn't spoken to in months. Their arguments had been subtle but painful. They just saw the world differently and dealt with their family's past in different ways. Still, there was something about him that always grounded her, a rough-around-the-edges kind of care, flawed but true. Brooke closed her eyes and wished, just for a moment, that the distance between them wasn't so great. She woke up early, feeling light, and spent the morning organizing documents in her office. Every folder was carefully labeled. She liked the sense of order that brought her peace of mind. It was her way of protecting herself from the chaos outside. As she stacked the papers, she noticed an old photo, her and Mark, still teenagers, smiling in front of a house in ruins. She smiled to herself. Without even realizing it, she had spent her life trying to rebuild that same imaginary home. In the afternoon, she packed her bags for a short business trip, just 3 days away, long enough to miss her own bed. Helen, her kind, elderly neighbor, promised to keep an eye on the house while she was gone. Brooke thanked her with a half-smile, the kind you give when you always carry a little bit of caution with you. "Nothing ever happens around here. That's a good thing," Brooke replied. Little did she know that this calm was only the beginning. The night before her trip, she looked over the house one last time in silence. The lamplight reflected off the freshly painted walls, and for a second, Brooke had the feeling the place was trying to tell her something. "I'll be back soon," she whispered, touching the door frame. It was a simple gesture, almost childlike, but it carried a promise of return and of safety. Hours later, at the airport, she mentally reviewed every detail. The cameras were on, the windows were closed, the safe was locked. Everything was in order. Brooke breathed a sigh of relief, ignoring the nagging anxiety that always appeared whenever she left home. "It's only for a few days," she repeated to herself. But deep down, she knew she was lying. Not about the length of time, but about the certainty that everything would be the same when she returned. The flight to New York was smooth. Brooke tried to focus on her work notes, but her mind kept drifting back to the house. She remembered the sound of the creaking floorboards, the light streaming down the hallway, the comforting solitude. She didn't know why, but this time the distance felt different. It was as if something inside the house was stirring in her absence. When she arrived at the hotel, exhausted, she looked at her phone and opened the security camera app. The feed showed the same calm, familiar setting. She smiled, satisfied, and placed the device on the nightstand. Before falling asleep, she thought, "My house is fine." She had no idea that just a few hours later, those very same images would turn into a nightmare. What if it were you, someone from your own family, invading the place you love most and you left in the dark about the reason? Subscribe to the channel now and follow this story to the end, because sometimes the enemy shares your own blood. The sound of the phone shattered the silence of the hotel room. Brooke answered, half asleep, only to hear Helen's trembling voice on the other end of the line. "There are people in your house, Brooke. I saw lights on and the back door open." The architect sat up with a start, her heart pounding. "Are you sure?" "Absolutely!" Panic began to take hold, but her body reacted with an automatic calm. She opened the security app, and the image that loaded made her stomach drop. The screen showed figures moving inside the house, not strangers, but familiar faces. Mark was walking slowly through the living room, his shoulders tense. Chloe, his wife, followed him, rifling through drawers, opening boxes, scanning every corner with an unsettling familiarity. Even the children were there, small shadows running through the halls. She watched, unable to breathe, struggling to process what she was seeing. Her brother, inside her house, invading. Time seemed to warp. She turned up the audio and could only hear the sound of footsteps, the creak of the floor, a door opening. Mark seemed to be looking for something, not with rage, but with clear purpose. He wasn't knocking things over or breaking anything, he was just moving things. There was a method to his actions, and that confused her even more. Chloe was whispering something to him, and they exchanged tense looks. It was like watching a bad dream in slow motion. When the camera view switched to the bedroom, her shock turned to despair. Mark knelt in front of the safe, the one she had always been so careful to protect. Brooke covered her mouth, her heart racing. He was using tools, making precise movements, like someone trying not to be heard. The sound of the metallic click echoed through her hotel room, and she felt her whole body tremble. This wasn't just an object being violated, it was an invasion of her very life.
For a few seconds, she thought about calling the police. The impulse was strong, but something inside her hesitated. The look on Mark's face, tense and almost sad, didn't seem like that of a thief. Brooke watched as he opened the safe, quickly looked inside, and then, surprisingly, placed something inside it instead of taking anything out. It was a swift gesture, almost unnoticeable, but it completely threw her off. "What are you doing?" she whispered to herself, as if he could hear her. The living room camera showed Chloe walking over to him, gesturing impatiently. Brooke paused the video, studying her sister-in-law's expression. Calm, calculated, like someone who was giving orders, not just participating. Seeing that only tightened the knot in her chest. She couldn't decide what was worse, the fear of being robbed or the feeling of being betrayed. Helen was still on the phone, sounding nervous. "Should I call the police?" Brooke didn't answer right away. She felt torn between urgency and sheer disbelief. "Not yet," she finally said. "Just wait a little while." It was irrational, but she needed to understand. She ended the call and kept watching, her eyes burning from the strain. When the recording ended, Brooke kept staring at the blank screen, her own reflection visible over the static image. She could feel her heart pounding, her breath coming in short gasps. The hotel room seemed to be closing in around her. Her brother, her own family, had crossed a line she never thought possible. And the worst part was that even through her tears, one persistent question remained. What if he thought he was protecting me? That night, Brooke didn't sleep. She kept staring at the frozen images, as if trying to pull an explanation out of them. Morning found the hotel room with the curtains still open, and the sunlight brought with it her first clear decision. She would return to Boston immediately. The house needed her, and maybe she needed the house to understand what was left of herself. The train back to Boston seemed to crawl along. Brooke held her phone tightly, her nails pressing against the screen as the security footage played on a loop. Mark walking, Chloe watching, the safe being opened. She tried to make sense of what she was seeing, but all she found were contradictions. Mark's face, despite the tension, didn't show guilt, it showed pain. With each repetition, she felt more confusion and less anger, as if something inside her was starting to question her own sense of right and wrong. When she arrived home, the silence felt louder than usual. The lock turned with a metallic click, and the feeling of strangeness was immediate. The air smelled different, carrying a faint scent of children's crayons and soap. Brooke walked slowly through the living room, her eyes scanning every surface. Nothing seemed obviously out of place, but she knew something was different. It was as if the house had been breathed in by another presence. In the bedroom, the safe's latch was bent, a silent witness to the violation. Brooke kneeled in front of it, her hands sweating. She opened it slowly, her heart pounding in her ears. Everything seemed to be in order, the documents, the folders, the keys. But nestled among the papers, a metallic glint caught her attention. A small device was blinking red. She picked it up, not immediately recognizing what it was. A tracker. Brooke felt her entire body go cold.
She pulled back, as if she had touched something alive. What did Mark want to track? What was he hoping to find? The questions came in waves, mixed with the echoes of old memories. Her brother had always been the protective type, but never invasive. "Why now?" she murmured. The room seemed to watch her, as if the house, a silent witness, knew something she had yet to understand.
Brooke left the tracker on the table and walked into the living room. She turned on the lights, one by one, as if she needed to prove to herself that the place was still hers. The sound of the light switches clicked like the dry beats of a nervous heart. She sat on the couch, hugging her knees, and looked around. The house felt emptier than ever, and the solitude she had once chosen now felt like a punishment. Night fell, and the weight of her doubts grew heavier. Brooke opened the video again and watched Mark's expression as he closed the safe. There was a barely noticeable tremor in his hands. He wasn't acting like a thief. The way he straightened the papers, the way he looked around before leaving, it all showed care, not haste. That realization disarmed her. Maybe it would have been easier to hate him if he had destroyed something. The hours passed slowly, the screen flickering with the same scenes on repeat. Brooke began to notice small details she had missed before. The way Chloe avoided Mark's gaze, the way she touched his back. Too controlled, too cold. That planted a new shadow of doubt in Brooke's mind. Maybe the betrayal wasn't coming from her brother alone. Feeling the heavy weight of exhaustion, Brooke turned off the lights and went upstairs. The dark house seemed to breathe with her, each step on the stairs a sound filled with memory. As she passed the bedroom, she looked at the safe again. The blinking light of the small tracker was like an eye wide open in the dark, watchful, unsettling. Brooke lay down, but sleep wouldn't come. In the middle of the night, she got up and wrote a sentence on a piece of paper. "Nothing is what it seems." She folded the note and left it on top of the safe, not really knowing why. Maybe she wanted Mark to see it. Maybe she just needed to feel she still had a voice in this story. When morning came, Brooke felt the weight of what was ahead. She knew she would have to confront her brother, not with anger, but with the urgency of someone needing to recover something more valuable than any amount of money: the truth. The phone rang mid-morning, and Mark's name appeared on the screen. Brooke hesitated before answering. The silence of that first second was so thick, it felt like an extension of the distance between them. "Brooke, just listen to me," he said, his voice rough. "I know how this looks, but it's not what you think. She took a deep breath, fighting the urge to cry. "I saw the cameras, Mark. I saw you." He took a long time to respond. "I knew you'd never forgive me, but letting Chloe destroy you was worse than breaking your trust." His words cut through her like a blade. Brooke stood up and began pacing. "You violated the one place where I felt safe," she said, her voice choked. "You could have come to me. You could have trusted me." Mark took a deep breath. "And would you have believed me? You always think you can handle everything on your own." The words hurt because they were true. Brooke didn't answer right away. She looked out the window, watching the trees sway in the autumn wind. Everything seemed to be moving except for her. "What did you put in my safe?" she asked, her voice firm. On the other end, he hesitated. "Something that could save you and condemn me at the same time."
She sat down, her heart tightening. "Are you talking about Chloe?" she insisted. Mark sighed. "She used your name, Brooke. She created fake contracts, made transfers using your social security number. I found the documents and I had to act before it was too late." Brooke closed her eyes, remembering the calculated calm in Chloe's gaze. Anger and fear swirled together inside her. "You could have told me," she said finally. "I tried, but Chloe controlled everything, even my words. I only saw one way out, to get in there and protect what I still could." His voice sounded tired, like someone who had already accepted her judgment. Brooke let the phone fall into her lap and sat there, motionless. The images, the words, the weight of the past, everything was jumbled together. The invasion was still unforgivable, but now there was a purpose behind it. The betrayal gained new layers. Was it possible to hate someone who loved her in such a twisted way? Hours later, she walked over to the safe and opened it again. The small tracker was still blinking, patient. She looked at it and felt something break inside her, not from anger, but from recognition. Mark had always been like this, protective to the point of self-destruction. That night, Brooke wrote a short message. "I still don't understand, but I want to hear it from you." She sent it, not expecting an immediate reply. Then she turned off the lights and sat on the floor, leaning against the wall, watching the dim room. For the first time, the silence in the house didn't feel empty. It felt like it was waiting for something. And as the wind made the windows vibrate, Brooke understood that the truth rarely arrives like lightning bolt. Sometimes it comes in whispers, carrying the metallic sound of a safe that never quite closes. The next day dawned cloudy, and the house seemed wrapped in a blanket of fog. Brooke felt like time had slowed down, as if the world outside existed on a different frequency. She made coffee, but the bitter smell reminded her of childhood mornings with Mark when they could still laugh about their struggles. Now the simple sound of the coffee maker seemed to mock the distance between them. The memory of last night's phone call still throbbed like an open wound. She sat by the window, her gaze lost on the damp garden. The phone rested on the table, a silent, threatening presence. When it rang, her heart leapt. It was him again. For a few seconds, she thought about letting it go to voicemail, but she answered. "Brooke, please don't hang up." Mark's voice was strained, scratching at the silence. "I didn't do it the right way, but I did what I thought was necessary." Brooke took a deep breath, trying to control the anger and the fear. "You call breaking into my house necessary?" she asked, her voice low and steady. He didn't answer right away. The sound of his breathing on the other end seemed like the only thread still connecting them. "I knew you'd never forgive me, but letting Chloe destroy you was worse than breaking your trust." These words echoed, so familiar that they hurt. She looked around, as if searching for support from the very walls. The house remained still, a silent accomplice to a conversation that was half reconciliation, half farewell.
"Do you think this comforts me?" she asked. "Knowing my brother chose to lie, to break in, and to expose me?" Mark sighed. "I didn't choose to lie, Brooke. I chose not to lose you." The words hung in the air, heavier than any accusation. Brooke let the silence stretch, the sound of rain running through the gutters mixed with their unsteady breathing. "You always tried to fix the world by breaking the things you loved," she said, without bitterness, just with an old, familiar sadness. Mark didn't defend himself, perhaps because, for the first time, he understood there was nothing left to justify. "I wanted to protect you, Brooke, even if it made me the villain." The call ended without warning. Brooke stared at the phone, her heart beating out of rhythm. There wasn't enough anger in the world to erase the tenderness she still felt for him. She stood up and began walking through the house, touching the furniture, the picture frames, the objects that used to seem like mere decorations. Now everything seemed to hold a piece of their shared history, a distant echo of what they were before the lies. In the office, she found an old drawing, her and Mark as teenagers smiling in front of a house sketched in a hurry. The lines were childish, but the memory felt vivid and alive. Back then, they both still believed they could rebuild anything as long as they stayed together. Brooke ran her fingers over the paper and whispered, "You broke what we had, but maybe there's still something left to save." She sat down at the desk and began to write, not thinking too much about the words. It was a letter, perhaps a confession, perhaps a request that would never be sent. She wrote about fear, about love, and about the weight of carrying broken trust. "I still don't understand everything you did, Mark, but I want to believe it wasn't just destruction." She folded the paper and placed it inside the safe, where only secrets used to be. When she closed the metal door, the sound echoed through the house, deep and almost solemn. A shiver ran through Brooke's body. That noise no longer represented just the trauma. It was also the sound of something being put to rest, sealed away, put on hold. The house seemed to breathe with her, exuding both calm and unease. That night, sitting on the edge of her bed, Brooke looked at her reflection in the window and murmured, "I just want to understand." The words came back as an echo, whispered by the darkness. Outside, the wind seemed to answer, rustling the trees in the garden as if time itself was confirming. Some truths only reveal themselves when pain softens pride. Dawn brought a cold, uncertain light, and Brooke felt part of that suspended atmosphere. The house was quiet, but the silence was no longer neutral. It carried the weight of doubt. The coffee grew cold in the forgotten mug, and the clock ticked away hours that all seemed the same. She knew she needed to do something, but her body wouldn't cooperate. Her gaze kept returning to the safe, as if the answers she feared were waiting there. She decided to watch the recordings again. Reliving that scene was painful but necessary. On the screen, Mark moved as if he knew every step of the way. The way he handled things, with care, with respect, confused her even more. Brooke paused the video several times, looking for signs of anger or guilt, but all she saw was sadness, and that sadness hurt more than any crime.
The hours dragged on, and she began taking notes, almost as a way to maintain some control. The time they entered, their gestures, the way Chloe avoided the cameras. It all made sense, and at the same time, it made no sense at all. Brooke felt her mind split between two opposing certainties, that she had been betrayed and that she might still be loved. Both felt equally unbearable. By late afternoon, she stood up and walked through the rooms of the house with slow steps. Every room felt different, as if the walls now held the memory of the intruders. In the office, the smell of paper and ink reminded her of interrupted projects. She touched the blueprints, the models, and felt a tightness in her chest. The work that once gave her purpose now felt like a failed attempt to fill the emptiness. At nightfall, she sat before the safe again and took out the small tracker. The cold object seemed to vibrate in her hands, a symbol of her brother's presence within the very space he had violated. Brooke watched it for long minutes, trying to decide what it represented. Love or control, protection or invasion. She found no answer. She simply put it back, like someone returning a mistake to its proper place. The phone rang once, and Brooke's heart jumped. Mark hadn't called since their last conversation. She answered without speaking. "Did you see what I left?" he asked. She took a deep breath. "I saw it, but I'm not sure I understand." There was a long pause before he responded. "One day you will understand. Just promise me you won't trust her." Brooke closed her eyes, trying to hold back tears. "You talk as if you still have the right to give me advice." "I lost that right, I know. But I'm still your brother." The silence that followed felt almost physical. Brooke realized that, even through the pain, the bond between them still existed, pulsing like a wound that wouldn't close. Before hanging up, she whispered, "I still want to believe you." From the other end, there was only a sigh, and the line went dead. Brooke remained motionless, the phone still pressed to her ear, feeling the echo of the words reverberate through her body. For the first time, the anger gave way to a melancholy exhaustion. The house, shrouded in gloom, seemed to understand her state of suspension. There was something sacred in that silence, the kind of quiet that comes before a revelation. Before sleeping, she turned on the hallway light and watched the reflection of the safe in the distance. She thought about how that metal object represented everything she had tried to protect, and everything she had lost by trying to maintain control. She closed her eyes and murmured, "Maybe protecting something also means learning to open up." The phrase sounded strange, but true. And when she finally fell asleep, she dreamed of the house before the invasion, alive, full of laughter, the floorboards creaking under familiar footsteps. When she awoke, she realized that hope was still there, buried among the memories. Forgiveness, she thought, might not begin with forgetting, but with the simple desire to understand. Morning arrived gray with the sound of rain tapping against the windows like a constant reminder that nothing was resolved. Brooke woke up early, but lay in bed for a long time, watching the ceiling. The house seemed to breathe at the same rhythm as her, slow and heavy. There was something different in the air, a feeling that the answers were close, but hidden in details too small to be noticed right away. The silence wasn't just an absence of sound. It was expectation.
When she got up, she went straight to the living room and pulled up the security footage again. The images had become an obsession, a broken mirror she kept trying to piece back together. She rewatched the moment Mark approached the safe. His movements were precise, but his eyes betrayed hesitation. She zoomed in on her brother's face. There was no coldness there. There was fear, guilt, and something harder to name: love disguised as desperation. The realization came as a gentle blow. Maybe Mark wasn't just invading. Maybe he was trying to keep her safe. Brooke ran her hands over her face, fighting the confusion growing in her chest. Hatred was easy to hold on to, but compassion hurt more. She paused the video and fixed her eyes on the frozen frame. That familiar gaze seemed to reach through the screen, still asking for forgiveness. The sound of the rain grew louder, filling the house with an almost hypnotic rhythm. Brooke closed the laptop and leaned back on the couch, watching the raindrops trace paths down the window glass.
With every sound, she felt the weight of his absence. The brother she knew seemed distant, but not completely lost. "What were you trying to tell me, Mark?" she murmured, more to herself than to the empty air. She decided to check the safe again. The document seemed untouched, but something told her there was more to find. She pulled out a folder of old contracts and noticed a thin envelope tucked between the pages. Inside was a small, unmarked flash drive. Brooke held it carefully, feeling her heart speed up. Is this what you wanted to hide from Chloe? She wondered, fear and curiosity mixed together. She turned on her computer and inserted the flash drive. The only file was named proof.mp4. For a few seconds she hesitated. There was something both sacred and dangerous about this moment. When the video began, the image was grainy, clearly recorded on a cell phone. It showed Chloe sitting at a table, on the phone, arguing with someone about forged contracts. Brooke's blood ran cold. Every word was clear, undeniable. "She used my name," she whispered. Her breath caught, her body tensed. The video continued, showing Chloe laughing, citing amounts and dates. The proof was right there, and now Brooke understood. Mark hadn't stolen anything. He had protected her. The tracker, the break-in, it all made sense, even if it was a painful kind of sense. She sat down, breathless, caught between relief and panic. My God, Mark! She stood up and paced around the living room, unable to stay still. Every memory of their arguments, her accusations, now seemed distorted. "You weren't the enemy," she said aloud, feeling tears well up. The house, a silent witness, seemed to embrace this revelation as if it needed to hear it too. The past was beginning to rearrange itself. With trembling hands, she called Mark, but he didn't answer. She left a short message. "I saw the video. We need to talk." The words came out between sobs, heavy with regret. It was too late to undo the invasion, but maybe it wasn't too late to salvage their bond. For the first time in weeks, Brooke felt something inside her grow calm. That night, she put the flash drive back in the safe, not as evidence, but as a reminder of the twisted act of love that had nearly destroyed them. As she closed the metal door, she murmured, "You always protected me in the worst way possible." The click of the safe sounded like a final period, but Brooke knew their story wasn't over yet. Mark showed up without warning at the end of a cold afternoon. The doorbell shattered the silence like thunder, and Brooke felt her body freeze. When she opened the door, she found him standing on the threshold, his face tired, his eyes red. For a moment, neither of them spoke. "Can I come in?" he asked, his voice quieter than she remembered. Brooke just nodded and made space. His presence seemed to shift the very air in the house. He walked slowly through the living room, looking at everything as if revisiting a sacred, forbidden place. "Everything's the same," he murmured. "Nothing ever stays the same," Brooke replied, the words coming out firm, almost involuntary. They sat facing each other, and time seemed to hung suspended between them. Mark looked at the floor before saying, "I didn't come to justify myself. I just wanted you to know that I knew what Chloe was doing." Brooke crossed her arms, trying to contain the mix of anger and tenderness his gaze stirred in her. "I saw the video," she said. Mark closed his eyes, as if the confirmation pained him. "So now you understand why I did what I did." She took a deep breath. "I understand, but I still don't know if I can forgive you." He lifted his gaze, his eyes glistening. "I didn't come asking for forgiveness, Brooke. I came to ask you to hear me out one last time." The silence that followed was thick, full of everything that had never been said. "By the time I realized what Chloe was plotting, she had already used your name for everything," he said with a voice trembling. "I tried to warn you, but she was reading my messages, controlling the accounts, threatening our children. I needed a way to act without her noticing." Brooke shook her head, tears springing to her eyes. "And that way was to break into my house?"
He smiled without humor. It was the only way I could find to save you without destroying my family. I knew you'd never forgive me, but letting Chloe ruin you was worse than breaking your trust. Brooke looked at him, and in that moment she recognized him. Not the childhood hero, nor the confused man he'd become, but something in between, human, flawed, desperate. The words hung between them, like a knot that wouldn't come undone. "You could have trusted me," she said, her voice hoarse. "Maybe," he replied, "but I know you would have stopped me." The words were harsh but true. Brooke realized he was right, and that hurt more than anything. The silence stretched until Mark stood up. "I don't expect you to want me around. I just needed you to know the truth." He took a step toward the door, but Brooke stopped him. "You always thought saving me meant taking control out of my hands." He turned slowly, his eyes glistening. "And you always thought being in control was the same as being safe." The words hung in the air, sharp and tender at the same time. Brooke took a deep breath, feeling their weight. "Maybe we've both been wrong," she said almost in a whisper. Mark nodded, and a small, tired smile formed on his lips. "Maybe that's what we do best."
He left without saying goodbye, and Brooke stood by the door, watching the sky darken. The house was quiet, but something within it had changed, a kind of melancholic lightness, as if it could finally breathe after holding its air for so long. Brooke closed the door calmly, and looking toward the safe, murmured, "Now I understand." For the first time, the words felt like liberation. The night Mark left stayed with Brooke like a scar. The house felt quieter than ever, but the silence wasn't empty. It was full of echoes. Every step he had taken still seemed to vibrate in the hallways. Every spoken and unspoken word still hung in the air. Brooke sat at the kitchen table, staring into a cup of cold coffee. Everything in her wavered between the impulse to hate him and the desire to believe he had done the best he could. In the days that followed, she tried to return to the rhythm of her routine. She woke up early, answered emails, reviewed projects, but her work felt colorless, without urgency. Her concentration slipped away with every memory. Sometimes her eyes would linger on the windows, almost expecting to see him walk by, as if forgiveness depended on his presence. Other times, she wished she would never hear his voice again. Guilt came and went like the tide, washing over everything and leaving behind traces of longing. One afternoon, the phone rang, and Mark's name appeared again. Brooke answered on the third ring, her heart already tired from anticipating the worst. "I saw the evidence being turned in," he said without preamble. "Chloe will have to answer for everything." Brooke closed her eyes. "And you?" "I just need to disappear for a while." The sincerity in his voice disarmed her. "You always run when you need to stay," and the silence that followed was confirmation enough. After the call, she walked to the safe and opened the door slowly. The flash drive was still there, resting among the papers like a fragment of pain. Brooke picked it up and studied it in the afternoon light. That small object held the truth, a truth that had cost them their trust as siblings. She put it back and thought that perhaps keeping it was a way of forgiving without forgetting. At night, the wind beat hard against the windows, and the house seemed to react to her thoughts. Brooke lit the fireplace and watched the flames dance. The fire always reminded her of Mark, intense, unpredictable, destructive, and necessary. "You saved me by breaking everything," she whispered to the walls, which seemed to listen. The idea that love could exist even within pain was starting to make sense. She thought about visiting him, but the fear of reopening the wound held her back. Instead, she wrote another letter. This time, the words came more gently. "Maybe I'll never be able to fully forgive you, but I can't bring myself to hate you either." She folded the paper and placed it inside the safe once more. She was learning that forgiveness isn't a single act, it's a process that repeats itself day after day. For days, the phone remained silent, and Brooke learned to live with the absence. The house readjusted to her rhythm, but something had changed. The space felt lighter, as if the pain had opened windows. The furniture, once frozen memories, now seemed like peaceful witnesses. It was strange, but forgiveness, even incomplete, was beginning to bring order to the chaos.
One afternoon, while reviewing some drawings, she heard a soft knock at the door. Helen came in holding a cake, a shy smile on her face. "You're doing better, dear," Brooke smiled back. "I think I am." They talked for hours about simple things, the garden, the weather, the smell of rain. When Helen left, the house felt more alive. Brooke understood that sometimes new beginnings start with ordinary conversations. Later that evening, Brooke looked out the window and imagined Mark somewhere out there trying to rebuild his own life too. "Maybe we're both architects of ruins," she murmured, and the phrase made her smile. There was beauty in the attempt to repair things. Before bed, she turned off the lights and sat on the edge of the mattress. The safe gleamed in the distance, subtle yet weighty. "You're still with me, Mark." And for the first time, the memory of him brought no pain, only longing. Time passed slowly, dissolving the anger and leaving behind only a gentle weariness. Brooke returned to her work, but the house remained her center, her living extension. Sometimes she would talk to herself, narrating her thoughts as if Mark were still there. It was a quiet way to fill the space and accept that love doesn't disappear, it just changes form. One night, the power went out, plunging the home into shadows. By candlelight, the safe gleamed and Brooke touched it carefully. The cold metal brought back the sensation of the past, but without the pain. "You're still here," she whispered, and understood that the object no longer held secrets, only memories. When the lights came back on, she realized the fear had transformed into gratitude. Days later, she received a message from Mark. "She's gone. I'm trying to start over." Brooke replied, "Me too." Few words, but full of meaning. As time went on, she learned that forgiveness is less about erasing what was done and more about accepting what remains. She began changing small things, new curtains, lighter wall colors, letting more light in, not to hide the past, but to integrate it. At night, sitting by the fireplace, she thought that maybe love was exactly that, a fire that sometimes warms you and sometimes burns you, but always gives light. Before sleeping, she looked at the safe one last time and whispered, "You survived with me." And in some way, she knew she was talking to herself. The following days were peaceful, but the past still lingered in the cracks. Brooke dreamed of the house in distorted versions, sometimes in flames, sometimes filled with light. She knew these dreams were echoes of guilt, but also signs that something inside her was healing. Everything had changed, but the bond with Mark still pulsed beneath the surface. One day she found a note left at her door. It was from him. "I ruined a lot of things, but I still believe what holds us together is stronger than what broke us." The trembling handwriting made her smile with sadness. She placed the paper on the open safe, a simple, almost ritualistic gesture, like returning a memory to its rightful place.
That afternoon, Chloe showed up. The same rehearsed smile, the same cold look in her eyes. "Do you think he did it out of love?" she taunted. Brooke answered without hesitation. "I think he did it because he didn't know how to love any other way." Chloe laughed and left. The door closed, and with it, Brooke felt a cycle come to an end. Later, she opened the safe and placed the note inside a book. The words no longer felt heavy.
Forgiveness is quiet, she thought. It happens when the pain no longer needs to defend itself. The wind came through the window, moving the curtains, and the house seemed to breathe along with her. That night, before falling asleep, Brooke looked at the ceiling and realized love isn't the absence of wounds, but what grows when we learn to no longer fear our scars. The next morning, Brooke woke to the sound of the phone. It was Mark. "She came to see you, didn't she?" he asked, his voice tired. "She did, but she has no power over me anymore," Brooke answered. Silence on the other end. "Chloe is gone. I think I'm finally free." Brooke was quiet for a moment, feeling the weight of his words. "Free from what?" she asked. "From everything that was holding me back, even from myself." She took a deep breath. "You always show up just when I'm starting to forget." He laughed without humor. "Maybe because I never forgot." They stayed connected for a few seconds through the sound of their breathing. "I never meant to hurt you," he said. "But sometimes love comes disguised as fear." Brooke closed her eyes. "And sometimes fear disguises itself as love." The conversation hung between them, delicate. "Can I see you?" Mark asked. "Not yet," she replied firmly. "But maybe soon." He accepted without pushing. "Then I'll wait." And the silence that followed was different this time. Not empty, but full of promise. Later, Brooke cleaned the house as if she were cleaning her mind. She opened windows, rearranged furniture, let the sunlight in. When she looked at the safe, she smiled. "I don't need you anymore to guard what's important." She closed the metal door and noticed that, unlike in the past, the sound didn't scare her this time. It was just the end of a cycle. At dusk, she wrote in her journal, "True love doesn't erase wounds, it just learns to live with them." And she fell asleep with the feeling that a new beginning had already started, even without saying its name. The following weeks brought a strange calm, the kind of quiet that comes before a reunion. Brooke was smiling again, even if cautiously. The phone remained silent until the day someone knocked on her door. She knew immediately. Mark was there. Thinner, his gaze hesitant. "Can I come in?" he asked. She just nodded. He walked through the house slowly, taking everything in. "Not much has changed," he said. "Enough has changed," she replied. They stopped in front of the safe, now empty. "I left it open to remember that nothing needs to be locked away." He smiled, visibly moved. "I spent so much time trying to protect you that I forgot to let you breathe. And I spent so much time trying to protect myself from you that I forgot how much I still loved you." The silence that followed was the most honest they had ever shared. There was no more anger, just exhaustion and recognition. Mark lowered his head. "I don't deserve forgiveness." Brooke answered, "No one deserves it. We choose to give it."
He stepped closer and asked, "Can I hug you?" She hesitated, then nodded. The embrace was brief, tense, but real. The house itself seemed to sigh with them. When he stepped back, there were tears in both their eyes. "I just wanted to fix things," Mark said. "Maybe fixing things just means keeping trying," Brooke replied. He left at dusk, and the air seemed lighter. The house, once so heavy with memories, now breathed with serenity. Brooke looked at the open safe and murmured, "Finally empty." But she knew it wasn't absence, it was space. And space was the new name for love. After their reunion, time passed with a new gentleness. Mark began visiting gradually, always with the caution of someone afraid to wake a sleeping thing. Sometimes he brought flowers, sometimes just silence. Brooke welcomed him with quiet acceptance. There was no more need for explanations. The love between siblings returned, calm and mature. Less urgency, more presence. One afternoon, they sat in the garden watching leaves fall. "Remember when we used to build forts in the living room?" Mark asked, smiling. "And you said you were an architect just because you knew how to use clothespins?" Brooke replied, laughing. Their laughter sounded light, almost childlike. For the first time in so long, the sound carried no pain. The visits became part of her routine. Sometimes they talked about the past, other times they just listened to the wind. Brooke realized that rebuilding wasn't about forgetting, it was about allowing something new to grow from what remained. And the house, once a battlefield, became a home again. Every wall seemed to breathe differently, full of memories, but without their weight. One night, after Mark had left, Brooke watched the moon's reflection in the windows. The safe was still there, open and empty. "You served your purpose," she whispered. "You guarded what needed guarding until I learned to let go." And for the first time, she turned off the light without being afraid of the dark. Days later, Helen appeared with fresh flowers. "You look better, dear. You seem alive." Brooke smiled. "I think the house has finally forgiven itself, too." They drank tea on the porch while the wind carried the scent of damp earth. The world seemed new, even though it wasn't. Brooke returned to her drawing. The houses in her designs now had large windows without locks and open floor plans. "It's all so clear," Mark said when he saw a sketch. "This is how I want things to be," she responded. "Nothing hidden, nothing locked away." One Sunday, Mark brought the children. They ran through the living room, laughing, their footsteps echoing like music. Brooke watched them with tear-filled eyes. This same house that had once been a stage for pain now sheltered life. Love, she thought, is exactly this, the return of sound after silence. That night, alone, she wrote in her journal, "Forgiveness doesn't rebuild what was lost. It builds something new in its place." She closed the notebook, her hand steady. She felt whole. Before sleeping, she looked at the ceiling and smiled. The house seemed to fall asleep with her. No ghost remained, only the quiet certainty that everything had returned to its place. Not the old place, but the right one.
On a quiet night, Brooke sat before the fireplace, watching the flames dance across the metal of the safe. There was peace in every crackle of wood, a domestic music that filled the air. The shadows on the walls recalled old movements, but held no threat anymore. It was as if the past was still there, but finally tamed. She decided to watch the security footage one last time. The old images seemed more distant now, almost like they belonged to another life. She saw Mark walking through the rooms, touching the furniture, hesitant. But instead of pain, she felt tenderness. "You were just trying to protect me," she murmured. For the first time, those scenes didn't hurt. She closed the laptop, took a deep breath, and looked around. The house felt alive, the air warm, carrying the scent of tea and wood. Everything seemed at peace. She picked up the old letter she'd written months before and read it silently. The words, once heavy, now felt gentle. "I forgive you," she whispered, and she felt that forgiveness was no longer a choice. It was a state of being. The wind blew outside, making the curtains sway gently. Brooke stood up and opened the window. Outside, the moon bathed the garden in soft light. For a moment, she thought she saw Mark walking on the sidewalk, hands in his pockets, his face calm. She smiled, not knowing if it was memory or imagination. Turning back inside, she felt the house welcome her. Every object, every corner seemed to breathe with her. "We're made of what survives," she thought, and she understood that home and heart share the same gift. They both know how to rebuild themselves, even after being broken. She turned off the lights and climbed the stairs slowly. At the top, she turned one last time to look at the safe.
The metal gleamed with moonlight like a silent mirror. Brooke smiled. Now you're empty, and so am I, but in a good way. She lay down, feeling her body light, almost floating. Sleep came easily, carried by the sound of the wind and the distant crackling of the fireplace. And before falling completely asleep, she thought, love isn't what keeps us trapped, it's what teaches us to open up. In the end, Brooke discovered that not every invasion destroys, some reveal what was hidden all along. If this story held your attention, leave a like, share, and subscribe now. Here, every truth has two sides, and the next one might be even more shocking.